I don't think I can set this somewhere where I'm going to be seen really well, so I'm going to try it. As long as I don't knock that over. And it looks like the slides are backwards, but I'll try to work in this. Actually, this is actually working really well. So welcome everybody. Thank you for being here today. My name is James O'Hagan. I am the Director of Digital and Virtual Learning for the Racine Unified School District. That includes also that I oversee all of our library programming, and I also am, I guess you could say, the esports czar, or the esports Pied Piper, or the person who's trying to get esports into our school district, because I really believe that it's good for kids and it's something that can benefit our students and our growing changing student athletes and how we see them. Oh, I need to do that. All right. So before I get into what esports really is, I wanted to challenge or present a series of challenges to the room first, so that you kind of understand why this is important and what the value is of us bringing the idea of esports into our schools. So some of the questions is your school meeting the needs of today's students with the technology that's available? So as you think about that, as we're thinking through this whole presentation, again, these are questions that I want you to reflect on a bit. Is your school redefining creativity, communication, collaboration, and critical thinking? Is your school creating a positive and culturally accepted community of students? Is your school creating an inclusive sports culture? Is your school opening new avenues for student success at higher education? So, with those questions in mind, I introduce to you the concept of what esports is. And esports, very simply, is competitive video game play. When we think about esports, well, let's break down the word a little bit. We know what sports are. Okay, when we think of sports, we think of some very definite things. Those are made up of games like baseball, football, basketball, rugby, of course, soccer. Okay, those are all examples of sports that many people play. Though I will say, early this morning at about 4:15, when I woke up and turned on the TV because I needed something to do rather than stare at the ceiling, I noticed that on ESPN they were showing poker, which I thought was pretty fascinating that poker was there and it had quite the following and millions of dollars being thrown at it. Esports is kind of the same in the sense that it is a umbrella concept of competitive video game play that is made up of different games. So, for example, League of Legends is a game that's commonly played. Rocket League is a game that's commonly played as an esports game. Fortnite, Overwatch, these are all different games under the esports umbrella. Now, I don't normally like to bring dollars and cents into things in education, but it is important to note that the esport market is growing worldwide. They expect that the regular participants viewership of those involved in esports is going to reach about 600 million people around the world by the year 2020, which will generate about $1.5 billion a year in revenue. Okay, so that's some big money. Okay, it's big money that, you know, when we ask ourselves as educators, how are we preparing our children for the future? Knowing that there's going to be an industry like this that can be started with sitting in your living room and playing a game, or participating in some of the auxiliary programs that are around it, such as broadcasting, fictional writing, the cosplay industry. There's a lot of things here that you can also tie into the esport and the game itself. So again, an audience of almost 600 million people. Now, I also want to point out too, as I'm going through my slides, you may notice over the bottom left-hand corner, I hate it when some people do this, where they'll cite something and they don't give sources. And I know the librarians in the room probably are happy that I'm giving sources, okay? I do provide sources in the slides, and I did put the slides all at weemta18.sketch.org. So if you go into my session, you'll have all these slides right here with links to all the sources where I'm pulling this information from. But the question is, do video games promote a sense of violence? And I'm saying this now up front because I wanted to get this out of the way early in the conversation. But there's two groups that have said that video games do not contribute to extreme violence. They don't believe in the video game violence theory. One of those, most importantly, is the Supreme Court. Supreme Court had a case several years ago, and of all people, the conservative Justice Antonin Scalia wrote the opinion, the court's opinion about video games. And number one thing that they said was that video games need to be defended under First Amendment rights. So they need to be defended just as much as books, just as much as movies, just as much as music. Okay? And he also said that when they presented the data that said that video games produce a violent culture, they actually refuted all the data. Like they had experts come in and said the data that they were presented with was actually not good that was collected. In fact, recently our own President of the United States, after the Parkland shooting, placed part of the blame on video games and the violent video game culture. And what was great about that moment, at least for video games, is that a number of studies had been going on and came out with their findings, and they found that no, video games do not contribute to an increase in violent culture among our students, amongst kids. Okay, they even there's one study recently where they played one of the most violent video games. They asked, I believe it was college-level children, to play Grand Theft Auto 5 2 hours a day for several months, and they did not find any increase in violent tendencies at all with those participants in the study. So I wanted to kind of get that out of the way early. And like I said, there's source material here, not just the news story, but I also put an actual study that was in one of the Nature magazines, one of the legit, like peer-reviewed magazines. So I wanted to make sure that you had the full information. So some of you may not have seen what esports looks like, or are coming in here totally new and are like, okay, he's already kind of blown my mind. I still don't have, he can only say so many words. I need something a little more visual to kind of understand what this is. So I'm going to show you this brief video. It's about 2 minutes long, 2.5 minutes long. And it's about a specific game called League of Legends. League of Legends is one of the biggest games in the world. The monthly play rate, meaning how many people are playing this game, is equal to the population of France. It's about 70 million people around the world play this game regularly, month to month. So I want to show you not just about the game, but while you're watching the video, note that there's people who are analysts who are watching or commenting at the beginning of the video, but I want you to look at the culture around the game itself. So there's going to be very little about the game, and it's going to be more about the players and the culture. So just briefly here, and I hope the sound is good enough for you. Wait. All right, hold on 1 second. I thought I tested sound out before we did all this. Yeah, I'm hooked up to the sound. Usually why I play the music, so I can have the sound going for all this. I'm sure that that's not contributing to the problem. I can almost hear it. Hold on, it might just be too quiet. Let's crank this up a little bit. All right, we're going to try this one other way. These speakers are supposed to be really good. Oh, wait. No panic yet.
Lead is the right word that I would
You don't bring a sweat. I don't.
All right, here we go.
Have you guys seen Esports and the E-League?
I don't know if that's sports.
It's a race to mindset.
But I don't know if athlete is the right word that I would
You don't bring a sweat. I don't consider it a sport.
play video games isn't like watching people play football. It's like watching people play fantasy football. It is one more step removed from human activity. You understand?
It's video games. It shouldn't be on a sports network. It's video games.
But can it truly be a spectator sport?
It already is. 71 million watched it last year. They reckon it's going to, by 2017, it'll be 145 million people watching it.
They're actually giving college scholarships for video gaming. And it's even gone to the point that now the government has acknowledged professional video gamers as athletes.
Same when you watch a football match, you can hear the crowd, everyone's cheering the team on, you make friends, these people you talk to, you play with online. It's all about community, it's being part of something that you're incredibly passionate about.
Sorry, I get a little choked up a little bit when I see that. It's pretty powerful stuff. I want to touch on a couple of things that were in that video. Number one is that the person who was saying that the athletes, the government is recognizing these people now as athletes, professional gamers as athletes. That was Rick Fox. He used to play for the Los Angeles Lakers. Okay. The stadiums that you saw in there, one of those stadiums that was full to capacity was the Beijing stadium that was used in the Olympics. They call it the Bird's Nest. That stadium was filled to capacity. It holds about 80,000 people. In 2016, they held the League of Legends Finals. That's a game. League of Legends Finals was held in the United States. It was held in 4 venues in the United States. All of them sold out in minutes. It was the Bill Graham Theater in San Francisco, the Chicago Theater in Chicago, Madison Square Garden in New York, and the finals were held in the Staples Center in Los Angeles. Sold out, completely sold out, okay? So those are big time venues for something like this. Around the world, not just where there's spectators in the seats to watch League of Legends, but over the period of the entire, which took place in October 2016, over that entire period, there was about 330 million people who watched the finals in some capacity. Okay. Think about how many people. Yeah. Sorry. Question.
Now, maybe the person in the back who was a college athlete and worked on butt off. How can you say that they're athletes and people who physically do the sport? I understand the sport, just like cars or whatever, but can't be in a separate category.
Well, one is sports and one is esports.
When you say they're an athlete, to me, an athlete is somebody who's physical and does the work. You know what I mean?
Is a bowler an athlete?
I don't know. But
Is somebody who throws darts, are they an athlete? Wait.
I'm not saying.
No.
We were talking about we were reframe our whole way of thought now.
Right. Because the one question I didn't pose is, my thought is, and we'll get to this later a little bit, I want to touch on this, but I do want to rethink how we think about athletics in general, especially at a school level. There's some people who call themselves athletic directors, and then there are some who I know are very particular about calling themselves activities directors, okay? And I feel that sports culture needs to be expanded to include not just those who can run fastest, push somebody over, hit a ball, or whatever. I want it to expand to I want to give equal opportunity to everybody. Just
and all that.
exactly. Cheerleading is considered a sport, So yes.
I would argue that if we think of athletics as physical movement, but if you look at a game like this, what about the dexterity of your hands? What about the physicality of eye movement and being able to pay attention? Because even in traditional sports, the mental is so important too. And so, I don't know that it's not physical.
I actually have some of the physiological data too I want to show in just a little bit, but I will say this. You look at me. I played high school football. Yes, I still play rugby today. I'm 42 years old and I still play rugby. My sister should have been an Olympic swimmer, but she chose not to. My father played at University of Notre Dame. My grandfather played for the New York Giants. I come from a family of what you would consider traditional athletes. Yeah. So I don't come at this as the guy who got left off the football team or anything like that. So. You're not. No, you're asking good questions. These are fantastic questions. You're asking exactly the kind of questions that a lot of people just. You're like the first group of people, and they weren't asking it to be condescending. You're not asking the question to be condescending. You're asking the question because we've been told what an athlete is for so long. But give me an opportunity to hopefully present to you some ideas and some thoughts, and then at the end, okay. You don't have to keep your mouth shut, but I do love having you in the room. Now, in 2016, ISTE came out and said, we are revising, well, actually, they started that years before, but they said they wanted to revise their standards for students. And if you click on the source of this, I actually wrote a series of blog posts, and I don't want to go into each of the standards and reviewing all the standards, but I encourage you to go look at the standards, read what I wrote, and I believe that esports is reflected in every single one of the ISTE standards for students. Now, you may say, but that's not happening in a classroom. That's okay, right? Don't we want our students to apply the things that are in the ISTE standards in their everyday life without even thinking about it? Don't we want them to be the knowledge creator, okay? Don't we want them to be the critical thinker? Don't we want our students to be those ones who are connected to a worldwide audience and are good digital citizens with others? Okay, so esports encapsulates all of the ISTE standards. I guarantee it. If you read the posts, and like I said, I don't want to go into too many details because we could get into each one of them and have a lengthy discussion about each one of the standards. But I do encourage you to look at the blog posts. Now, this right here, like I said, the source data is here, and I want to make sure everybody's clear on this. This is not made up information. This is data that was collected by a friend of mine, James Kozacek, who's a researcher at the University of Central Florida, and he worked for a group called the High School Star League, which was one of the first organizing bodies of esports for high schoolers in the United States. And he had the opportunity to survey the student athletes that they had participating in the High School Star League. And what they found was, when they surveyed the students, those who were part of a varsity level esports team. So those students were not just part of a club that was kind of just meeting regularly. I mean, these were kids who had letters and uniforms, like an actual uniform jersey kind of thing for their esports competitions. 100% of those kids, when asked, do you want to go to college? 100% of them said yes. They want to go to college. Okay? Those who were in a club, about 88.21%, yes, 88.21% said, those who were in a club level said they wanted to go to college. So there's definite value in formalizing where we see esports sitting in the schools. Now, as far as their interest in academics, again, from the same study, but you can see up here, and it might be hard for you to read, sure, the students were very interested in things like computer science, computer engineering, chemistry, business, pre-med, biology, accounting, mathematics, physics, psychology, and about 11% were in game design. But these kids have all kinds of other interests as well, too, beyond just being the quote-unquote nerd, okay? The tech geek, yes?
This is like high school students?
These are high school students, yeah. So many of them are interested in digital media. The one that I love, that I keep coming back to whenever I look at this, is that many of them were interested in music, 7%, and writing. Video games, the thing that draws people into a video game isn't just the gameplay itself, it's the mythology that's built around it. It's the story. For example, the one that I love, the story that I love, that my kids also love, and I'm just thrilled to death that they do, is The Legend of Zelda. Legend of Zelda came out in 1987. And my kids were thrilled to death when we built a computer and I put Legend of Zelda on the original one. And they're like, oh my God, I play this game on my Wii. I play this game on my Switch. And they wanted to play like the original game. They wanted to go, and the replay value of that was tremendous. And what's happening now with esports isn't just the idea of kids playing these games, but these kids saying, I want to write the fan fiction. I want to do the cosplay. I want to create music that goes to these stories, okay? They see these as their modern mythology. Just as important as some people saw religious figures, in the Middle Ages, just as the Greeks saw their gods in ancient times. For a lot of our kids, they see these characters as something that they kind of want to embody in some way. So it's really important to realize that we're not just talking about kids who are interested in computer science. Yeah, sure, there are a lot of them who are engineering computer science, but this is a variety of students that are coming, and colleges are noticing this too. We'll get to the colleges in just a little bit. Students that play video games competitively at school that have a varsity team have a higher GPA than those who just have a club. So again, when you formalize it, when you say we're going to do a varsity level team, their GPAs are noticeably higher than those who are in a club level sport. Okay. Also, those who are in the varsity level, they find that their teams are more culturally accepting than those that are in a club. I don't want to insult any athletes. I'm sorry. I'm not going. I love the back and forth.
4.0 right now.
Hey, there you go. I don't want to insult any of the athletes here, but sometimes, and this esports also has its problems too. But when there are hazing stories, those tend to make national news. Okay, and they can be, and a lot of people. I don't want to put down our sports culture because I'm part of it, but it becomes a big news story when there is issues of hazing related to student athletes, especially at the high school level. And we want to, like I said, we want to find ways to help our students become more culturally accepting of those, not just in their own schools, but also around the world. And 20% of those who are on a varsity team are more likely to take AP classes and also take more AP and IB classes as a percentage of their schedule than those just participating in a club. So these are kids who you look at them on paper and they may not be your traditional athlete, okay? These are kids who are sometimes being left behind by their athletic departments in their schools. Now, I'm going to build the case. Athletic departments in high schools especially have boosters, right? When you have boosters, that means parent involvement. When you have more parent involvement and you have more boosters, what else does that mean for your athletic program? It means more money. When you include more students, especially students of this caliber, high-flying students, those students who normally don't see themselves as athletes, they see themselves more as book learners, or they see themselves as just being kids who are, they want to do robotics, or they want to do chess team or something like that. When you start to formalize them into athletics, bring their parents in, now you're building a booster culture. When those kids graduate, they go off to college, and again, these are your AP level kids, and they've got those jobs that, Big Bang Theory has pretty much proved that, the Big Bang Theory culture and the .com culture has said these are the ones who are making the money and doing the big things. Where are they going to come back to when they have money to give? Okay? So, also, in Racine, we are focusing around building out the academies at all of our high schools. So we have pathways, learning pathways within our high school. So it's not just a general prep or college prep or AP prep. We have different pathways for engineering, biomedical, media, different kind of pathways. Esports actually ties into all those things. So again, we talk about the music, we talk about the art that's involved, the cosplay, the everything around it, broadcasting. Broadcasting is a big one. Has anybody heard of Twitch? Twitch, yep, yeah. Amazon paid over $1 billion for Twitch. And all that Twitch does is broadcasts video games. Anybody can be a video game broadcaster. You have an Xbox at home, you can hook it up to your Twitch account, you can actually broadcast yourself just sitting around playing video games. There are kids who go onto Twitch and will ask for donations as they're playing games, and they will get legitimate cash just playing video games while they're sitting in front of their, just sitting there playing video games. But schools can also use this. Schools can also then become broadcasters of their esports matches. So think of the public relations as your teams are being broadcast to people around the world, not just local, not just in your community, but around the world. Think of your students who may not be very good esports athletes, but maybe those who want to get into broadcasting, who want to get into production. Okay, this is an easy way for you to get into it. And the source in there that I have should take you to Twitch's student how-to. Basically, how do you get started doing esports broadcasts using Twitch? So I highly recommend looking at that source if you haven't already. Now, as you look here, this is a photo that was taken at Orlick High School. I want to say it was in November, maybe December. And we had just put out a flyer. We were trying to figure out how much interest is there at Orlick High School around esports. And we had over 40 kids come to the meeting. And it's a student body of about 1,200. Okay, so we had about 40 kids show up, mostly male, some female. Okay, because in esports they aren't male-female teams; they are mixed teams. Okay, so the idea, while it is male-dominated, some of the best esports players I've seen are female, and especially at the high school level. And they're usually it's interesting to see the dynamic of when you put males and females together in athletic competition to see how they work together. Again, what are we trying to build? Redefine athletic culture, culturally accepted students, critical thinking, communication, collaboration. These are things that I'm not saying that sports don't do. What I'm saying is we have another pathway in order to get there with this. Now you may say to yourself, I have no idea how I would be an esports coach in any of this. Gentleman on the right is Joe Wendt. He's the activities director at Orlick. Guy on the left is Greg Smith. And Greg is a history teacher. I believe he also teaches German. I know he speaks German. But he knew about this because esports are huge in Europe. And he just said, this is really cool. I want to get my students involved in this. I don't know what I'm doing. And I said, that's okay. You don't have to know what you're doing, Greg. The best part about being an esports coach is that a lot of it is self-directed by the students, but they do need an adult to guide, to help focus in their efforts, to help bring them together. That's where the coach really comes in with esports. Our coach at Walden High School, Joey Luba, he has sometimes no idea, going into it, he had no idea what League of Legends really was. But he had a bunch of students who came to him and said, we need a coach. And we need you to help bring us together. And he was able to do that and do it very successfully. $6,000. This is one of my favorite things because I knew that there are esports scholarships available for students. And when I mean scholarships, there aren't full rides as of yet. But what colleges have figured out is they look at all that, they know that data. They know the kind of students, AP, IB-driven students, kids with diverse mindsets, kids with different goals. They look at it and they say, and the colleges that are figuring this out very quickly are your Division II and Division III schools, your smaller schools. Those are the ones who typically cannot compete with Wisconsin, Purdue, Northwestern, Michigan State. I'm going through the Big Ten. Nobody wants to go to IU. The place is terrible. I went to Purdue, so we went to the moon, kind of thing. Neil Armstrong, good guy. Drew Brees, got that too. But the colleges, those lower level colleges, I don't want to say it lower academically, but just your smaller schools figured out we can attract these kids. The playing field becomes very level because while Whitewater's football team will never compete, thinking maybe they would, I don't know, but really, right now, Whitewater's team is not going to compete with Madison, okay? They step on the field with Madison, they're going to get destroyed, most likely, probably. But they do say, hey, we've got 5 computers. Madison has 5 computers. Let's give these kids something to come to us. Let's give them the attention that they want. Hey, we can bring in a student. So for $6,000 a year, a small scholarship, give them the opportunity to be an esports athlete on our campus and also get their degree while they're here. So Zach Woods is our first student. He's from Walden School in Racine, and he got a $6,000 a year scholarship from Robert Morris University. Now, to show you just how quick schools are to get on offering scholarships, we had a story printed in the Journal Sentinel paper about Walden's esports team. 2 days later, I got an email from the University of Jamestown in North Dakota asking if there were any students who would be interested in a scholarship opportunity to play esports at the University of Jamestown in North Dakota. They hadn't seen the kids play. They don't even know who the kids were. They just saw esports and they said, wait a second, we can offer these kids scholarships and get them to our school. Okay, possibly, potentially.
Are they D1?
I think they're NAIA. I think they're NAIA.
Okay, so it doesn't matter. Because like D3, you can't get scholarships for that, but D1, you can, so it doesn't matter.
I think they do it more, I don't know if they do it as official scholarship. I know D3 has their ways of doing scholarships, but they don't call it scholarships. They do like some kind of funding change or something like that. The one that's also giving out scholarships, Robert Morris is Division I, but I want to say like UC Irvine, they might be 2 or 3. I'll have to check on that. Thanks for asking that question. That's a good question. But yeah, so Zach, like I said, $6,000 a year for the next 4 years for him to go to college, and he's very happy about that. I did have a quote from him. I pulled up an email before the presentation started, and Zach emailed me, and he said very clearly that basically he loves that there's a different way for him to participate in athletics that he could never do before. He said, yeah, I used to play sports when I was in middle school. I wasn't very good at it. I couldn't hit the ball. I couldn't run very fast. But this is allowing me to be an athlete in a different way. Okay? So he's now created an identity for himself outside of just his academics. Walden School doesn't have its own basketball team. They don't have their own football team. They don't have their own baseball team. This is theirs. Their esports team is theirs, and they're the first ones in Racine Unified to do it. The one school, and this is maybe something you can bring back to your programs in your school districts. How many of you have alternative high schools? Do they have their own teams? Do they have their own identity beyond just being a place where kids are placed who need alternative means to graduate, hopefully? Wouldn't it be great to build a sports culture at your alternative school that can actually keep kids tied into their school so that they actually graduate and finish? I used to work in alt ed in Rockford, and that was kids would disappear for weeks at a time. And we would hope that they would come back to us so they could graduate. This is something that when I'm looking at our esports landscape in Racine, I want to have this not just at our comprehensive high schools and our charter magnet schools. I want to have this at our alternative high school as well too. There's no sense that these kids should be not able to participate in some kind of athletics at their own school building. They shouldn't have to go back to another school to participate in traditional sports. Now, I did provide a number of videos in here, and I'm not going to go through the videos, just because I feel like if you're really interested in this, these are some of the 3 best ones that I think you should see. These are collegiate level programs. There's 2 of them from the University of Utah. University of Utah pushed really hard on the Pac-12 to formalize esports as being a sanctioned Pac-12 sport, and the Pac-12 almost did it. They almost did, and they didn't at the last minute because one of the presidents of Arizona, she did have concerns and things that they needed to work out around Title IX. And hopefully the Pac-12 will get these things worked out, but what the students did instead was, after the Pac-12 said we're not ready to formalize this yet, they started their own conference. So the students said, okay, we don't need buses, and we don't need you to fly us back and forth, and we don't need a stadium to do this in. We will self-organize. So 11 of the 12 Pac-12 teams are part of their own conference. They form just amongst themselves. That was student advocacy, that was student growth, that was students driving, that was students taking ownership over their learning experience, okay? What culture they wanted to have at their school. UC Irvine. I love what UC Irvine has done. Their activities director looked at their landscape and he said, I should be able to provide something for all my students. And if I've got large student interest here, why would I not want to honor that student interest and build on it? And Irvine started off as a club. They're now one of the premier esports teams in the United States. They also built a $25 million esports arena and training center. Irvine doesn't, when I grew up in the San Francisco area, okay? Irvine was the school that you applied to after you didn't get into Berkeley, and after you didn't get into San Diego, and after you didn't get into Davis, and after you didn't get into San Francisco, and after you didn't get into there was like, Irvine was one of those ones that was more like seen as like a commuter school almost. And the culture there has completely changed and shifted. I didn't say UCLA because, it's just UCLA, whatever. It's a city school. I'm sorry, I'm playing California jokes to Wisconsin people, but anyway, so yeah, Irvine has, like I said, they see this as a potential opportunity again to attract a student population that they've never been able to attract before. Fitness. I should find a photo of what people think in their minds is the stereotypical video gamer. Picture, if you will, in the background, a mountain of cans of empty Red Bull on one side and a mountain of cans on the other side that are Mountain Dew, and orange Cheeto dust covering the face and hands of the person as they sit in a very dark room with pale white skin, emaciated, sunken eyes. That is not the esports athlete. That's not the good esports athlete. The good esports athlete, the ones who are going to be successful, are the ones who, and they don't have to be the strongest or the fastest or the fittest, but they train their brain using things like weight training, yoga, meditation, breathing, high-intensity interval training like CrossFit would do, and aerobic conditioning. Because all those things train your brain in different ways. And the way it trains your brain are going to support your esports athlete. So weightlifting is going to help with your complex thinking. Okay? One of the most popular games, League of Legends, the only way to describe it is 5-on-5 live-action chess. You have pawns that are constantly coming out of your base, moving across the board, and you're trying to destroy people's towers and take their base. Okay? So these pawns are constantly going out. You and 4 of your other teammates are moving across that board and trying to coordinate attacks on their base to try to take out their base. All the while, your different characters have different abilities, much like how there's a knight and a rook and a queen and a king, those kind of things. It is, like I said, it is intense, it is complex, it works on a very large board, and there's strategy to all of it. So weightlifting is going to help with your complex thinking. While you're in that these intense esports game moments, especially in League of Legends, you have to be able to control your breathing. You have to be able to control your emotions. You have to be clear-headed. You need to be able to think clearly in a high-intensity situation. Yoga, meditation, being able to control your breathing is the ways that that's going to happen. High-intensity training is going to help with your cravings and your addictions. All right? We want to break down kids doing this at all hours. We don't want the best gamers are not going to be the ones who sit there for 8 to 12 hours and burn themselves out. We also want to make sure that we've got, again, the aerobic exercise. That's going to help with your memory and the sports drills. So when you're doing things like basic calisthenics, that's just going to help with your visual spatial processing and your attention. So in order to be an excellent esports athlete, you do need to do things that traditional athletes would, or what we call a traditional athlete would also need to do. We wouldn't ask somebody to step into a football field their senior year at the varsity level who has never lifted a weight, never run a mile, never pushed a car or whatever it is that they do at that level, okay? Because we know what would happen. Same thing with our esports athletes. We have to train them as well, too, in the physiological sense. Milwaukee Bucks, along with 17 other NBA teams, have gotten into the esports world. About 15 NHL teams have also said we're going to have esports teams, too. And the reason for that, can anybody guess, is?
Money.
Yes, money. Of course it's money. NHL teams especially, though. NHL is not what you would call financially lucrative. They have a hard time making money. The NHL teams, though, the ones who are savvy, have said, we need to diversify our talent pool, we need to diversify our product. NBA teams love to diversify their product. NFL owners are usually a little bit older. Jerry Jones types, they don't like to necessarily change too much. Besides, they're making a ton of money already as it is. And MLB has not really forayed into this at all, but the NBA and the NHL are getting into this big time. I want to show you, too, this is the new Bradley Center. And appropriately, the guy who's heading up the esports team for the Milwaukee Bucks, his name is Andrew Buck. Okay, I don't know if they hired him because of the name or what, but when I talked to him, very nice guy, very easily approachable. When I talked to him and I asked, about the plans for the new Bradley Center, he says, well, we're not just looking at this as a venue for basketball. He says, we're also looking at this as a venue for esports competitions. So, those of us who are Wisconsin taxpayers, we put in about $250 million into this, so we should, when they have an esports competition, feel free to go up there and ask to be let in. It'll be okay. Okay, check it out. So, with all this, I've been trying to going along the lines here, I've been trying to make the case about why we should be doing this, why it's good for kids, why we need to get on this now and do all this. I have a vision for Racine Unified School District as far as where esports are going, where I want it to go. Now, your district may be a one high school district, that's okay. We'll get into how you can participate as well, too, but my vision for this is a citywide conference. I see that Racine Unified should not only have its 6 high schools, Walden, Real, which are a magnet charter, RAL, Racine Alternative Learning, which is our alternative high school, and then Horlick, Case, and Park should have esports teams. But I also want to bring in St. Cat's, Lutheran, and the Prairie School. Prairie School is private, Lutheran is Lutheran, St. Cat's is Catholic. Again, what are we trying to do? We're trying to build a new sense of community. We're trying to build a new sense of belonging. We're trying to embody, again, those things that the ISD Standards for Students want us to have. So I feel that starting with the game League of Legends is that we would bring together this citywide conference. So if you're thinking about having this start at your high school, where do your students participate? Where do they start? And one place you can start with your high school right now is the Wisconsin High School Esports Conference. It's on Facebook. You can look it up. You can join it. You can check it out. It is a question I get a lot. What do I need to start an esport? Like, do I just join the conference and then what? Well, we've already invested in high-speed internet access to our school buildings. Many of us already have computers in our high school buildings. Usually that's really all you need, because the game League of Legends is free to download. It's absolutely free to get started. You could go, as long as you've got a PC or a Mac, it will not work on a Chromebook. But if you've got a PC or a Mac, you can go home tonight. It doesn't need to be a super robust, high-end computer. But you can go home tonight, download it, and just try it out. They've actually got tutorials that will walk you through some of the game basics. And I guarantee you, because I am terrible at the game, you will feel stress. You will feel your heart rate rise. You will feel your pupils dilate and dry out as you try to move your mouse and figure out how the heck you're doing this, okay?
Yeah, is it all mouse operated or?
It's mouse and keyboard. Yeah, no, it's not, I'm terrible I'm worse at those than I am with the mouse and keyboard, so. How do you get started? Well, outside of the equipment, the High School Star League actually put together a pretty good guide here. And again, if you go to the source, the guide is available for you to download and take a read of. It operates a lot like, you can get it operated very much like a club to get you started. I do recommend that you allow the students to have things like ownership, building a constitution, deciding whether or not they want to do GPA requirements. I personally am not a fan of GPA requirements for athletes, period. City of Rockford about 5 years ago did away with their GPA requirements because they felt it was worse for kids to kick them off teams and not let them back onto their teams until their grades went up. They said, let's take the approach of keeping the kids on the teams and let's tutor our students and keep them here because we've got a high poverty population that we just know when they go home they'll be running the streets. ESPN Outside the Lines came in 5 years ago and said, well, we want to follow up with you in 5 years and see how your data looks. And ESPN came back 5 years later, and their data was through the roof with their student athletes. They were retaining more student athletes. Not only that, their football, basketball teams, baseball teams, all their athletics were way more competitive than they had been in the past. And they said they were graduating more student athletes, and their student athlete GPA went up. So, but that's a sidebar, okay? Before we get into closing, does anybody have any questions? Yes?
When you have a team, is it focused on a single game, or how would you, if there are kids who are specializing in different things?
That's a good question. So we do get a lot of people who will say, we want to start with Overwatch. Overwatch is a first-person shooter game. Considering the climate of our school and school culture right now, I do not recommend starting with a first-person shooter. It's not a good way to sell to the community at all. League of Legends is a perfect game to start with because it is free, and it is, like I said, it is 5-on-5 live-action chess. It is, while your character gets eliminated on the battlefield, we can say, it does go back to start, and you do regenerate, and then you go back out on the battlefield. So, Rocket League is also another game that not quite as popular for the high school. That's actually a popular game at the elementary and middle school level. Kids at that age love it. But League of Legends is probably the one, that's the one that the Wisconsin Esports Conference is focused on right now. And that's the one that's going to garner usually the most support, not just with your students, but with administrators as well, too. Yeah?
You talked about the grade point average. Do your kids in your esports teams, do they have an athletic code that they follow?
So the Walden School is currently the only active esports team that we have, and they, as part of their constitution, they did do an academic code. And like I said, the team being very self-driven and student-driven, they get on each other about that. And what they've also done too, now one student has gotten an athletic scholarship. It's now created competition where the other kids who are on the team now said, oh, I'm going to beat that. I'm going to get more than $6,000. Yeah.
What about drinking, smoking?
I don't think they put that into their code. I don't think that was necessarily spelled out. But, yeah.
How do you handle, I believe there's 5 seats to play. How do you handle if you have more kids and there's always not a G, B team to play? How do you rotate people?
You can do an A team and a B team. You could have multiple teams. Usually,
Maybe the other school doesn't have as many kids or something like that.
if a school doesn't have that many kids. So I recommend when you get started that you want to try, if you can't have 5 kids to field an entire team, usually, I haven't had a situation yet where I go into a school when there aren't at least 10.
The problem we have is there's usually more kids that want to play than we can play against.
Yeah.
So not everybody gets to play. So it's how do you decide who gets to play and who doesn't?
You can also do it like a chess ladder where they have to play against each other internally and level up and make an internal competition to get you up to those top level, to the top seeded team. Yeah.
And, right, we've all had those students who are just brilliant but low performing academically.
Sure.
Or have you had any experience with those kids wanting to be involved in this and therefore something changing in the way they approach school?
I don't have any direct knowledge of any of that narrative. I do know that the effects have been after high school. One example that I got is a really good one, is a student who usually was a very good advocate for herself. She was not a very good esports athlete, but she, like me, sees the value in having that culture and that club. And she got to Marquette University and badgered the university into formalizing their esports team. And I think Marquette now and UW, Milwaukee are getting together and forming some kind of esports coalition or something. So the sense of, is the low performing student going to be better. I can't speak to that necessarily. However, data will say that if you keep kids involved in extracurriculars at school, they are going to perform better academically. Because again, they have that sense of being part of something beyond just, oh, I can't play football because I don't want to get a concussion. I'm one of those mindsets too. My father played for Notre Dame. My grandfather played for the New York Giants. I am not one who, if you asked me today, said, would you start a high school football team if you had the chance? I would not. I have a real problem with the data that's coming out. Purdue University has done brain studies. Obviously the NFL, or Boston University released their brain studies. I have friends who I played football with in high school who would get their bell rung and have lasting damage. I have a neck injury, not from rugby. I've played rugby for almost 20 years. Different sport, completely different. Football is something else entirely. When you have a false sense of security wearing shoulder pads, helmet, thigh pads, knee pads, and we say that this helmet's going to protect our brains. I don't understand how a helmet can protect something that's floating in a fluid from banging up against your skull when you make contact with somebody. And it's not just the concussions that you have to worry about. Purdue's brain study that they did in 2015, they looked at high school students at the beginning of the football season, and they looked at just those who got subconcussive hits, those who just made impacts with others. So a lineman who comes out of his stance and fires out on somebody and hits the guy across from him, right? Those students, those who did not get concussions 6 months after the football season ended, still showed evidence of brain injury. How does a school district nowadays look at data like that, studies like that that are coming out about the damages of CTE? How does a school district say, we want to develop young minds, we want the best and the brightest? And then on the other hand say, well, we got to have our football team. It's a weird thing for us to say. I don't believe football is going away. I just don't think schools are going to condone it in the near future. I think, the state of Illinois right now is saying kids under the age of 12, we want to pass a law that says they can't play tackle football. Okay, that's the Dave Duerson law. Dave Duerson, when he committed suicide because he was battling the effects of CTE, we later found out, he purposely shot himself in the chest. He didn't shoot himself in the head. He wanted his brain studied, because he knew that there was something wrong. He was not a dummy. And I just think that what esports does, it allows us, again, the opportunity to start to look at and redefine our sports culture in schools so that it is more inviting for everybody. Okay? So, yes?
Are there, for lack of a better term, are there traditional sports, esports first? I mean, you have esports football, you have esports.
There's
not a Madden model, but I mean something.
Well, Madden is a very popular game, and there are tournaments. There are Madden tournaments. The one that's going big right now is NBA 2K. That's the one that the NBA is really pushing and promoting, and in fact, their draft is April 4th in New York. So that's the one that the Bucks are involved with, so they're using NBA 2K. But the one, like I said, the one game right now that seems to be like the standard starter game before you branch out into other things is League of Legends. That's the big one right now that's for people. Yeah.
There's a little bit of a startup cost because you need pretty, somewhat intensive, computers that can give you the best performance.
Not for League of Legends.
Yeah.
But I will say that as far as startup costs for the laptops, I see a lot of districts that spend, $1,000 on MacBooks. Okay, we were able to get our Lenovo laptops in Racine for about $1,200. They are higher end, and somebody said, "What happens if the esports program fails? What if it goes bad?" I said, "We've got $1,200 laptops now. I'm sure that there's principals who would absolutely love to have." Or for photo editing, or for a variety of different purposes, yeah.
Does it filter down into the middle school teams and competitions?
So middle schools, that's a kind of hard one because you don't want League of Legends. They could do, yeah. I prefer at the middle and elementary school levels. It's saying, how can we build creation and collaboration in a digital environment some other ways? And you want to do a game. The one that I always loved was Minecraft. Kids. When I was the tech director in Forreston, Illinois, we launched an iPad program that I allowed students to have. There was a basic set of apps that we wanted them to download, but then we said, you can download whatever apps you want as long as they're not mature rated. We filtered them out and all that other thing. And I came to school early in the morning. And this, again, Forreston is a town, school district of about 1,000 kids. It's a farm town southwest of Rockford. And I get there early in the morning, and I would see pods of kids sitting around, 4 or 5 together, just circled around. And I walked in and go, what are you guys doing? They said, well, we're playing Minecraft. Like, what's that? And so they were showing me how they were creating these games and these things in these virtual environments, which I thought was fascinating. So I went in and I did a search on, I had the ability to see what apps, how many apps were installed on what iPads, right? And I said, I wondered, how many Minecraft app installations are there? 99% of the 650 iPads that we gave out grades 6 through 12 had Minecraft installed on them. The ones who didn't have it installed on them mostly were teachers. Okay? If I had locked that thing down, I would have never seen that happen. But like I said, that allowed kids to get into that digital environment. They were allowed to be creative. They were allowed to kind of exist and coalesce and work together. And now when you do get into that sports aspect of it, now you're like codifying it, you're solidifying it. It's important for us to also realize that right now there's a ton of money about to be made in esports. We got to protect our kids. How do we protect our kids from predators who come in and say, I'll pay you $35,000 a year to come live at my house and play video games for me. You don't need school. You can just come play video games for me. You'll be great. Because that sweet spot for the esports athlete right now is about the ages of 16 to 24. So if we want to develop these athletes and protect our athletes, we need to understand the culture that we're talking about. We need to be part of it. We need to protect the narrative. We need to change the narrative around esports to make sure that schools are not just a part of it, but also, like I said, being protective of our student athletes as well, too. We wouldn't allow a kid to just go off and go play, professional basketball in Europe unless he's really good, I guess. But, we would certainly want to ask some questions about that. So, and there's, like I said, there's kids who are able to make money doing this now. So it's a good idea, like I said, for us to be educated on it, be part of it, rather than to be defiant about it and say, well, this isn't really happening. I feel very concerned. Illinois is about to see esports as emerging, meaning that they've got about almost 80 high schools who are participating in esports, so that the IHSA now wants to almost formalize how esports is done in the state of Illinois. Wisconsin, I feel WIAA will not touch this right now with a 10-foot pole because they see this as not traditional. And that worries me. So that's why you have the Wisconsin Esports Conference, because we're saying we know we got something good here that's good for kids. What's more important, traditional sports or doing what's best for students, what's best for kids? Yeah?
Do you have many physical sport athletes that are doing this simultaneously?
Since Walden doesn't have any formal teams, I don't know how many of those students are actually also participating in sports at other high schools. But when I showed you that picture of the kids who were at Horlick High School, I don't think there was a kid in that room who's ever run a mile or lifted a weight a day in his life. Okay? But again, it's not just changing the narrative about what athletes are as we see them, but also as the students see themselves and how they also see athletics and what athletics are. Yeah?
I would say, if you think that in terms of mental competitors, we have a Dungeons and Dragons team and a Dungeons and Dragons club and a Magic club, and those kids do cross over into summer athletes. A lot of them are theater kids, and they just kind of come and go.
It's
take their time.
And it's anything that we can do to connect our kids better to our schools and their extracurriculars and with each other. It's something that we want to do. So I'm sorry to rush us because it is after, but I do want to just say really quickly in closing, how can esports meet the needs of your students with the technology available? Questions to think about now that you've kind of sat through this. How can esports support and redefine creativity, communication, collaboration, and critical thinking within your schools? How can esports create a positive and culturally accepted community of students? How can esports create an inclusive sports culture? And what avenues can esports open for student access to higher education? Again, that's scholarship money. That scholarship money is sitting out there. Don't let it sit. And with that, I'm done. Thank you.